Good afternoon and welcome to the February webinar for the Spring Hydrology Outlook. This is Kelsey Angle from the National Weather Service Central Region Headquarters. Today's briefing will be a general overview of the Spring Hydrology Outlook for the Mississippi Basin, including the Red River of the North and Great Lake drainages. Additional information and forecasts can be found online at www.weather.gov. The March webinar for the Spring Hydrologic Outlook is scheduled for Thursday, March the 6th at 2:30 in the afternoon Central Time. Invites and webinar information will be emailed early next week. Today's presenters are Jim Noel from the Ohio River Forecast Center, Steve Buan from the North Central River Forecast Center, Kevin Lowe from the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center, James Paul from the Arkansas Red Basin River Forecast Center, and Jeff Graschel from the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center. This webinar is being recorded, and a follow-up email will be sent with information on how to access the recording. If you have trouble with the Join Me slides not advancing during the webinar, please close your browser and log in again. So let's begin this afternoon with the first presenter, Jim Noel.
Thank you, Kelsey. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jim Noel here at the Ohio River Forecast Center. I'm going to be kind of going over a general summary on the following slides, and then just as in past years, we'll go ahead and break it down by basin, and we'll be rotating from the Ohio Valley into the upper Mississippi Valley, then around to the Missouri Valley, and then down through the Arkansas, and then finishing up in the lower Mississippi Valley. So on the slide that comes up on your screen next, we're going to take a kind of a review of where we are with our current conditions, and then from there we'll be proceeding to our forecasts for the weather, and then ending with the forecast for our hydrology and rivers. So this winter, we've seen kind of not, drastic conditions like in some winters we've seen, but we still do have anomalies from normal. We are seeing wetter than normal conditions in the Ohio Valley, as well as the far upper Midwest in northern Wisconsin and northern Minnesota, and then back into parts of Montana since December 1st. However, at the same time, in the mid-Missouri Valley down through a good portion of the Arkansas Basin, we've seen below normal precipitation this winter, anywhere from 25 to 75% of normal in that area. On the next slide, we'll be taking a look at the winter temperatures so far, and as most of you know, it's been a cold winter over a good portion of the U.S. east of the Rocky Mountains, with the core of the cold weather centered in the upper Midwest and Great Lakes. Temperatures in the blue areas on your slide are averaging since December 1st about 10 degrees below normal, and that's very significant for a 2.5-month period. Usually once we see temperatures about 5 degrees below normal over a 3-month period, that would be considered much below normal. From these below normal temperatures, we've seen enhanced ice formation and enhanced frozen ground depths across the far northern plains through the upper Midwest and into the Great Lakes and northern Ohio valleys. We've seen ice anywhere from a foot to several feet thick in some areas this winter on some of the rivers, and frost depths of anywhere from 1 to 4 feet. For example, in the Ohio Valley, it's very rare to see frost depths more than a few inches. Those frost depths have reached in excess of a foot in the northern Ohio Valley. And then even deeper frost depths of up to several feet are in the upper Midwest. As we move to soil moisture conditions, basically from the leftover drought, you could track it all the way back to the 2012 drought. There's still some dryness in parts of the lower portions of the upper Mississippi Valley, especially centered western Wisconsin into eastern Iowa and Illinois. Of course, there's a snowpack that's been getting eaten away, eroding a little bit here with the recent storm in eastern Iowa and northern Illinois. And as that snowpack melts, that will help to recharge the soil conditions some. But we also have to deal with frozen ground. We do have the lingering drought conditions in the Arkansas Basin, basically from western Oklahoma and on back into eastern Colorado. At the same time, soil moisture conditions are wetter than normal in the northern plains and into the northern Rockies as of February 17th. On the next slide, translating those soil moisture conditions from the latest drought monitor drought status, we do still have some lingering drought conditions in portions of the lower portion of the upper Mississippi Valley, north of St. Louis, especially in portions of Iowa. But the main drought area in the Mississippi drainage system is really focused from Nebraska down through western Kansas, southeastern Colorado, and down into western Oklahoma. And that's been persisting, and we'll be talking more about that in a few minutes. If we translate that further then on the next slide to the USGS streamflow conditions as of February 18th, we see that most of the Mississippi drainage system is in the green, which is considered near normal conditions. Again, except where that kind of main drought area is from Kansas down into Oklahoma and eastern Colorado, where the orange areas are indicative of below normal stream flows. You can also see a smaller image to the lower right-hand corner of the dot plot from the USGS. And again, in the upper Midwest, because of the winter, freeze conditions, most of those USGS stations are not reporting in terms of, flow at this time because everything is frozen over. On the next slide is the Army Corps of Engineers total flood control storage available. And on this image, we have a comparison of the percent available in 2013 in February to February of 2014. And in each of the divisions, from MVD, the Mississippi Valley Division, LRD, the Ohio Division, on back into the Missouri Division, what you'll notice is all four of the divisions have basically almost all of their flood control capacity this year. We're seeing 97.1% in the Ohio Division, and then on up to almost 100% of capacity available out west throughout the rest of the Mississippi drainage. Compared to last year, it's even better, and again, the bottom line is we're in very good shape from a flood control capacity if we were to have some significant rains behind the flood control projects of the Army Corps of Engineers. We're going to translate now into the snow water content in our snowpack across the Mississippi drainage system. And I do have a comparison just to reference this time last year. And the main notes that you will see is you will notice from 2013 to 2014, there is more water content in portions of the upper Mississippi Valley from southern Wisconsin and southern Minnesota down through eastern Iowa and northern Illinois, and then stretching over into the Great Lakes system of Michigan. Further, there is also additional significant water content in the snow in northern Ohio and northern Indiana as well. At the same time, you'll notice in portions of eastern South Dakota and on up into southern North Dakota near Bismarck, you'll see generally below normal water content and definitely a lot less than last year in those areas, and Kevin will be talking more about that in just a minute. In addition, I wanted to show the February 17th slide just because we did have a storm system over the last 24 hours that has eroded the snow water content from portions of Missouri through southern and central Illinois and into a good portion of Indiana and Ohio and northern Kentucky. Most of that water content has now been released so that the snow line is a lot closer to about Interstate 80 from Iowa east. We're now going to translate to our short-range weather forecasts. And what we're expecting is after that storm system moved across portions of the Mississippi Valley yesterday, creating blizzard conditions in the upper Midwest and some heavy rain and severe weather in portions of the mid-Mississippi Valley to the Ohio Valley, we now have only weak weather systems expected over the next about 7 days and next week across most of the Mississippi drainage system. And most of the area is in blue or lighter colors. So that is, we're seeing lots of green and blue colors, indicative of generally 3/4 of an inch of liquid precipitation or less over the next week. The exception would be some of the higher terrain in the northern Rockies where some significant snows will continue to build. Looking further to the second week into the outlook period, we are expecting the below normal temperatures that come back next week to continue to linger into early March across a good portion of the Mississippi Valley. This was the case last year in March, too, where our spring season was delayed some in terms of warming and wetting. And it does look like there's some delay again this year from our cold winter that likely now looks like it's going to linger over into the beginning of spring as well. The core of the cold temperatures over the next couple of weeks will be centered again in the upper Midwest into the Great Lakes, but even so, it will extend further south with below normal temperatures really across a good portion of the Missouri Basin down into the mid-Mississippi Valley, as well as over into the Ohio Valley. The arrow I have there is kind of showing that on the left image of the big influence of the northern jet stream pulling in the colder air. At the same time, the storm track on the right image with that arrow coming up from Texas into the Tennessee, Cumberland, and southern Ohio valleys and lower Mississippi valleys, the storm track will now, after being north here yesterday, will shift to the south over the next couple of weeks, and that storm track will try to bring a little bit of wetter weather between the period of February 28th to March 6th from the lower Mississippi Valley into the Tennessee and Cumberland and lower Ohio valleys. At the same time, below normal precipitation with that cold air is expected in a good portion of the upper Midwest. Looking further ahead into our early spring outlook from March through early May, from our Climate Prediction Center of the National Weather Service, we're expecting the below normal temperatures to continue in the northern high plains, upper Midwest into the Great Lakes and northern Ohio Valley, with some above normal temperatures in the lower Mississippi Valley. At the same time, we are forecasting equal chances, meaning most of the area, it could go either way. It could be normal precipitation. It could be somewhat above, somewhat below. There's not a lot to hold our hats on. We are showing an area in the mid-Mississippi Valley into the Ohio, southern Ohio, Tennessee, and Cumberland valleys with above normal precipitation. But I would want to preface that by saying that confidence in that precipitation outlook is fairly low, and that's not uncommon during the springtime when we have transition seasons in the spring and fall. Our confidence tends to be lower in our precipitation outlooks unless we have some kind of specific climate event going on that we can have better abilities to forecast. In relationship to that, our drought outlook that was just issued by our Climate Prediction Center through really the good part of spring is calling for basically in that area that is circled from southern Minnesota into Iowa back into Nebraska and Kansas to show basically those areas of drought will either linger or should improve. And really the main focus of any drought this spring would probably be focused in the headwaters of the Arkansas Basin. So now let's go ahead and translate all of that into our late winter, early spring flood outlook through the Mississippi drainage system. And basically what we're expecting right now is, in general, we'll break it down in details in just a minute, we are expecting near normal flood risk across the majority of the Mississippi drainage system this spring. Any colored, orange-colored square that you see here, it means that there's at least a 50% chance of reaching minor flood stage. Any square that shows a darker red color would be indicative of at least a 50% chance of reaching what the National Weather Service defines as a moderate flood level. And you will see that this year we do not currently, at least, based on the current conditions and current snowpack, show any site in the Mississippi drainage system that is predicting at least a 50% chance of reaching major level. If we do focus a little bit more, again, you will see a lot of the orange areas in the lower portion of the upper Mississippi Valley extending into the western Ohio Valley and down into the lower Mississippi Valley. Those minor to some moderate floods, that is very common in the Mississippi drainage system during the late winter and springtime. So that's why that risk is considered near normal. We also see some moderate floods being forecast in the lower Missouri Basin. Again, Kevin will be talking about that. That's not uncommon during the spring to have minor to moderate flooding in the lower Missouri. And you'll also see some minor to possibly moderate flooding in the Red River of the North and eastern, extending south into eastern South Dakota with some minor floods forecast there. Again, this is all based on our current conditions and what we think will happen over the next couple of months. So with that, we're going to drill down now into each of the more detailed areas of the Mississippi drainage system, and we'll start out with the Ohio Basin. And we are forecasting our typical minor floods across most of the, especially lower Ohio Basin as we go into the next few months. The one area that is probably above average risk is in northern Ohio and northern Indiana, where we do have above normal amounts of snow water content still in our snowpack even after the storm system of yesterday. We are releasing our ice jams today. We are getting some significant ice jam flooding in northern Ohio and northern Indiana as we speak. But even after the ice jams are gone, we still do have above average snow water content along with some frozen ground that lingers up there. So the risk there is elevated in those areas. Otherwise, the Ohio drainage basin would be considered near normal. You can see this on your next slide for the Ohio Valley. Anything in green is considered near normal risk, where the areas in northern Ohio and northern Indiana are considered anywhere from about 1.5 to 3 times the normal risk for flooding over the next couple of months. So in summary, for the Ohio and Cumberland area of the Mississippi drainage, we are expecting rainfall to be near or slightly above normal into spring. We do have snowpack and frozen ground conditions that are above normal in the far northern portions of our area. Snow water content in northern Indiana and northern Ohio are in the 90 to 99 percentile, which is about, again, as high as we see snow water content, anywhere from 1 to 4 inches, but we have dropped that down now to about 1 to 2.5 inches in our area. So we do expect some minor to moderate flooding over the Ohio Valley as we move into spring, and that would be considered near normal risk, with the exception of northern Indiana and northern Ohio, where the risk is above normal. And finally, the rainfall and thunderstorms are the big driving forces of flood threats in the Ohio Valley. And we do contribute about, on average, 60% of the total flow into the lower Mississippi drainage system. And so rain and thunderstorms are our big thing that we have to deal with. And again, the lead time on being able to forecast that well is not always that great. But again, for the Ohio Valley, we're expecting about a near normal flood threat, except for northern Indiana and northern Ohio, where we do have an above normal flood threat. Now with that, we're going to go ahead and transition to Steve Buan at the North Central River Forecast Center to talk about the upper Mississippi Valley and Great Lakes.
Thank you, Jim. So in the upper Mississippi and the Great Lakes and the Hudson Bay drainages, we're looking at what kind of snow water content we're looking at in the model. Anything that's in green would be above 3 inches in the model, and we can see that northern Wisconsin, northeast Minnesota, and lower Michigan seem to be the hot spots with the excessive water content in there. And especially we're going to focus in on that southern Michigan. You're going to hear a theme here as I go over the briefing that the flood risk is really pointing at southern Michigan. So next slide, please. So when we look at the ranking of that snowpack, as Jim mentioned here, that in the southern Michigan and northern Ohio Valley is abnormal for this time of the year, ranking in the 90th to 99th percentile. We had a snowpack over the Missouri and southern Illinois areas that were taken off with the rain that we had in the last 24 hours, and we are seeing some flooding there. We'll go over that in a minute, but that's gone now. Again, that was unusual for this time of the year. What you will notice that as we see the lighter blues into the greens and yellows as we get west of the Mississippi River, our snowpack is much more normal for this time of the year. Looking at that 2 to 3 inches of water content is a really normal water content. So the areas to focus in on where we're seeing this unusual snow: northern Illinois, northern Indiana, southern lower Michigan, and then northern Wisconsin into northeast Minnesota. So it's not a broad brush blanket across the entire upper Midwest. It's kind of more focused in certain areas. Next slide. So what we got currently is ongoing minor to moderate flooding from northwest Indiana across northern Illinois into southeast Iowa and northeast Missouri. We've seen very high runoff rates from the rain and the snowmelt that's occurred due to that frozen ground condition, and we are seeing a lot of ice impacting the flow in the rivers, causing very erratic stages, things to fall dramatically and then turn around a couple hours later and rise dramatically at the gauges. So I'm sure in rivers in that area, people are seeing wild fluctuations going on of several feet in a very short period of time. So something to be watching out for with this type of flooding that's going on now, and this is the type of flooding that we're going to expect to see when these conditions in northern Illinois, northern Indiana, and lower Michigan, when we see the breakup eventually come in a couple weeks, the same type of effect. And the major blizzard that occurred in Iowa, Wisconsin, and Minnesota has been incorporated into the outlook numbers that you're seeing on the internet right now, and everything I'm going to talk about coming up. So next slide. Now the graphics and the dots that you see now are updated from what Jim showed. We had some late updates that went into the system and did not make the charts that Jim had. So these are slightly updated, but again, the same theme here, the same area. We're seeing the risk for flooding is concentrated in lower Michigan, northern Indiana, southern Wisconsin, and right along the Mississippi River. You see the bulk of Iowa, the Des Moines, the Cedar, Iowa, the Minnesota River drainage. Those areas are all green in that they've got less than normal risk of flooding. And we still, along the main stem red, those red circles we're seeing up there, that's really a normal risk of flooding, and even out into the Souris River. Now we'll go over pretty much region by region. So next slide. Lower Michigan. It may not seem all that severe. We don't see too much red for the moderate flooding at this 50% level, but we've got a greater than 25% shift to more likely flooding than what would be climatologically normal. And climatologically normal is actually a 1 in 10 or 1 in 5 year floods for this area. You won't experience flooding every spring in this area. So we've seen a very significant shift into more likely flooding. If we're to get rains, a significant rain, broad, widespread rain over here with warm temperatures in mid to late March, we're not going to get it in the next couple weeks, but mid to late March with this snowpack in place, we're going to expect substantial, significant flooding across lower Michigan. The Grand River, Saginaw River Basin, and the tributaries down into the St. Joseph, Kalamazoo. So don't, just because we see some green dots on here, that's just a function of that it's not quite shifted to that 50% level, because maybe historical flooding is only 10%. We're very close to seeing 50% likelihood across the entire area and down into northern Indiana. Next slide, please. So now in the mid-Mississippi area, southern Wisconsin, Illinois, and eastern Iowa, we see that there is a pretty decent risk here for some spring flooding. We're seeing it today, and that when we finally do bring off that snowpack, if it comes off with a rain sometime after that first week of March, we can expect to see some of this erratic flooding like we're seeing now, and it could be significant flooding. There's thick ice on the rivers there. There's a history of ice jam flooding at breakup when we get conditions like this. We really got to be paying attention here in a couple weeks to our local weather offices there in Davenport, in Chicago, in Milwaukee, in La Crosse, to be aware of all the updates that are coming, and especially that update that will be coming for the national outlook on March 6th. Next slide, please. A little further south, again, we're seeing a 50% risk for a moderate flood on that lower Illinois River, and even down in parts of the main stem Mississippi. So this could change too. We're seeing that from the January outlook to the outlook we just produced, we've seen a shift along the main stem Mississippi to a little bit higher risk for flooding. And with expected potential storms coming up here in early March, that could even shift a little bit more if we happen to get another blizzard like we just had. So with the severe winter hanging in there, we really need to pay attention to these areas, as flood risk may increase due to the severity of the winter. Next slide, please. Now, up into the Hudson Bay drainages of North Dakota, northwest Minnesota, again, we see some moderate risk of flooding at the 50% level. That's not unusual. These areas do see flooding about every other year on average, in the long-term averages, and they do see moderate floods. So we're not expecting anything severe at this time in the Minot area on the Souris River in north central North Dakota, because we are seeing fairly dry conditions. in the Saskatchewan. But once we get below Minot, we've got a little bit wetter ground condition and more snow, and therefore we see the higher flood risk there. In pretty much the entire Red River Basin is in an average condition for soil moisture and snow. Therefore, we're seeing a very normal risk. North central Minnesota into the western Great Lakes area, we've got a very heavy snowpack developing. We've added to it. We're still seeing the normal flood risk, but again, we've seen it shift in the last 3 weeks to more likelihood, so we really got to pay attention for our next outlook. Next slide, please. So in summary, we're looking for enhanced runoff. With this cold weather we've had, deep ground frost, and a very normal soil condition going into the winter when we're east of the Mississippi, especially enhanced runoff this spring. The flood threat for really is emphasized for southern half of lower Michigan and northern Indiana. Next slide, please. And again, I'm going to emphasize it. We do have a high concern for widespread significant flooding across northern Illinois, northern Indiana, and southern lower Michigan, especially if we bring this snow pack off with a warm rain in that mid-March time frame. We don't think it's going to occur in the next 2 weeks with the cold forecast like Jim noted. So we really got to be looking at that weather more in the middle part of March. And that concludes the briefing for my area.
All right, thanks, Steve. Now we're going to go ahead and transition over into the Missouri Basin with Kevin, and I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Okay, thank you, Jim. My name is Kevin Lau, and I'm with the Missouri Basin River Forecast Center in Kansas City. As Jim stated earlier, let me start by saying that overall, comparing the historic probabilities with the conditional probabilities, we're looking at a near normal risk for flooding this spring across the majority of the Missouri Basin. So there are really no outliers. I will start with this mountain outlook, and then I'll move to the plain. So on this first slide, the left-hand plot shows the mountainous basin snowpack conditions in terms of percent of normal snow water equivalent. Snowpack conditions in the mountains can generally be categorized as above average. The higher elevations of the Milk are about 110%. The Yellowstone and the Missouri River headwaters are running about 130%. And then the North and South Platte basins are both running close to 130% as well. The February water supply forecast, developed by the Natural Resources Conservation Service and collaborated with the National Weather Service, was issued on February the 10th. And the summary graphic is shown on the left-hand side, or on the right-hand side. This most recent water supply forecast reflects conditions as of February the 1st. And it suggests that we're looking at an average mountain snowmelt runoff season this spring. This near-average runoff projection includes the Platte River system, which is a welcome sign for them after years of drought. Granted, we have received quite a bit of snow in the month of February, and so I expect that the March water supply projection that will come out the first 10 days of March might show an increase in the runoff volume. I don't expect it to be a significant increase, though. So for right now, it looks like we will have a normal year with regard to mountain snowmelt runoff. Okay, second slide, please. Now, this next slide is a typical snow water equivalent accumulation plot for a SNOTEL station. This one is Monument Peak and is located in the headwaters of the Yellowstone. Now, I offer it not so much to indicate how much we may be above normal, but simply to show how far along in the accumulating season we are. The light blue trace is the historic accumulation plot for the past 30 years. And so for this date and time, on February the 21st, we are usually about 70% through the snow accumulating period. And so that's the idea that I wish to convey with this particular plot. So we've still got some time to go in order to know the full picture of what the mountain snowpack will do. Though we do have a better than average mountain snowpack, the long-range projections issued by our office earlier this week does not indicate significant flooding due to mountain snow runoff alone. Now, there is a chance that the Laramie River at Laramie, Wyoming, might approach minor flooding, and the North Platte at North Platte will need to be monitored as well. Okay, slide 3. Okay, this is so we're now going to transition into the plains. There is snow in the plains, but it's in the plains region of the Missouri Basin, but it's limited in aerial extent and is quite shallow. There are some reports in excess of 2 inches of liquid equivalent in some portions of the Milk Basin and in some portions in North Dakota. But overall, the plains snow is not significant in the Missouri Basin. Okay, next slide, please. Now, wet soil conditions going into the winter, coupled with the extremely cold temperatures this winter, has resulted in a deeply frozen ground condition across much of the northern plains. So if we do build something of a plain snowpack later on, or if the timing of spring rains are such that they fall on still frozen ground, then we will see hydrologic activity. Long-range projections by our office suggest minor flooding in portions of North Dakota, and minor flooding possible in the James and in the South Dakota portion of the James River and the South Dakota portion of the Big Sioux. The basins that I've highlighted in North Dakota include Apple Creek and Cannonball. Again, all of those we expect to be minor at worst. Higher than normal streamflow conditions in the fall, coupled with unusually cold temperatures, has led to ice formations, as Jim and Steve have already alluded to. This has occurred on many of the streams within the Missouri Basin. Reports have come in on the Bighorn, the Wind, the Gallatin, the Niobrara, and the North Platte rivers so far this season. But the impacts in our in the Missouri Basin have been localized and relatively minor to date. But ice jam flooding will continue to be a threat for the remainder of the season. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, convection, thunderstorm activity, springtime rains drive the springtime flooding in the southern third of the basin. So we're looking at Kansas and Missouri and southern Iowa here. Of course, any snow that builds up and quickly melts helps to recharge the soil moisture, but thunderstorm activity is the primary cause for flooding in this area. Preliminary long-range forecasts developed by our office this past week suggest the likelihood of minor flooding this spring in some areas of eastern Kansas, including some of the smaller streams in the Big Blue Basin and in the Meridocene Osage Basin in Kansas. Now, on the Missouri side of the line, there is potential to have minor to moderate flooding in some areas in the Grand and Osage Basins. And in fact, with the rain that we received over the past couple of days, we do have one location in the Grand Basin that is currently cresting in moderate. The Missouri River below Kansas City also has a few locations that could potentially exceed minor flooding this spring as well. Again, this flooding in the southern third of minor to moderate is not atypical. Next slide, please. So to summarize, there is a little better than average mountain snowpack, but we've roughly got 30% of the accumulating period left to go, so things could change. We have relatively insignificant plain snowpack, at least for now. Generally wet conditions and above average stream flow in the northern plains went into freeze-up. Wet fall soils and extremely cold winter has led to a deeply frozen ground condition. Relatively minor and localized flooding due to ice jams has already occurred but remains a threat. No significant flooding expected due to mountain snowmelt runoff alone. and generally minor flooding is projected in the northern plains, and minor to moderate flooding is already occurring in the southern third in a few locations and will continue to be a threat. This concludes the Missouri Basin brief.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Now we're going to be shifting further to the south into the Arkansas Red Basin, and I'll be turning it over to James Paul.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. I've just got a couple of slides today to present, and they mainly reiterate much of what Jim spoke about earlier concerning the current conditions, but I'll be looking mainly at the Arkansas Red Basin. The upper left image shows another perspective on percent of normal precipitation that has occurred over our basin since the beginning of the 2014 water year. As you can see, much of the basin is below normal, with a few isolated above normal locales in south central Kansas and east central Colorado, although there's above normal precipitation since the beginning of the water year is not too terribly high anyway, so even though they're above normal, it's not excessive per se. The lower left image is from the NRCS and shows their estimates of snow water equivalent for Colorado. You can see that for our area, we are slightly above normal at 110%. This image is slightly misleading in that this is using their snowtail sites, which are mainly in the mountainous region in the main stem Arkansas headwaters. Above Pueblo Reservoir, the snowpack is above normal, but the other portions of southeast Colorado are well below normal. Finally, the upper right image shows the current soil moisture state as a percent of normal for this time of year, and this comes directly from our hydrologic model that we run here at the ABRFC. You can see the eastern portion of the basin is not doing too badly with respect to soil moisture, but the problem areas are still out west where we continue to endure some pretty intense drought conditions as indicated in earlier drought monitor images. The next slide shows our area's long-range flood outlook. As you can see, all of our forecast points are indicating less than a 50% chance of flooding. And for our area, this below 50% probability is normal for the ABRFC. Finally, in summary, most of the spring flooding in the ABRFC is directly related to specific convective precipitation events, which, as you know, are difficult to predict at the 2 to 3 month time frame we're talking about today. And another important point that I'd like to reiterate, and as Jim alluded to in his earlier slides, in the ABRFC there are quite a few reservoirs that have flood control as part of their mission, and most of the Corps or USBR projects in the ABRFC are generally at or below the top of their conservation pools and have almost all of their flood pool available to capture any excess runoff that may occur. All that being said, we are looking at a normal to below normal flood risk in our basin, and again, for our area, normal is below 50% probability of flooding at our forecast points. That's all I have. Thank you.
All right, thanks, James. Now I'm going to be turning it over to Jeff Graschel down at the Lower Mississippi River Forecast Center to end our discussion on the Mississippi drainage system. So take it away, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Jim. This is Jeff Graschel. The first slide that we have here is actually just to kind of show over the last month, we've actually been sort of dry across the lower parts of the Mississippi River. Obviously, we have no ice or snow issues to deal with at all since we've been pretty warm now in 70 to 80 degree weather here for the last week or week and a half now. But when indications are, at least through January and parts of February, we were pretty cold across our area, but because we weren't really hot and humid, we really didn't have a lot of rainfall associated in our area either. Not that that makes a huge difference on the lower part of the Mississippi River, since most of the contribution that we get is from the upper parts of the Ohio and Jim's area, and then from the Missouri and the upper Mississippi area from Kevin and Steve's area. So for the lower part of the Mississippi River, really the information that was provided by our upstream RFCs is really indicative of what happens on the lower part of the Mississippi River. Next slide. We have a big area here, just like others had alluded to. What you're seeing, colors of orange and red, are really typical of what we have in our season across our area. So we typically have minor and even moderate flooding in a lot of these locations just because we have over 50 to 60 inches of rainfall a year, and they typically get just minor flooding across these particular areas. And really, the seasonal flooding is what we're anticipating over the next couple of months. although we had 3 to 6 inches of rain last night in southern parts of Mississippi, which did result in some moderate and approaching some major flooding on some of our smaller tributaries in Mississippi and Louisiana. So those things, as others have alluded to, convective systems are really hard to pinpoint and predict, even as we get in just a couple of day period of time, much less going out for 1 month or 3 months. Next slide, Jim. So really in our area, because everyone else upstream is looking at seasonal or average conditions across the Mississippi and Ohio, that's the same for the lower part of the Mississippi River itself. So we're really not anticipating too many problems, at least at this time. But as everyone says, all the flood potential down on the lower part of the river is really, a lot of it is driven by the individual convective rainstorms, in combination possibly with some snow melt that we potentially may have on the Mississippi and the Missouri basins. And that concludes what I have.
All right there. Thanks, Jeff. So in summary, basically, we had very high risk of flooding over a wide area of the Mississippi drainage system back in 2011, and that switched to a larger area of growing drought as we went through 2012. And then in 2013, that risk kind of backed off towards near normal. In 2014, a large portion of the Mississippi drainage system is considered near normal. As Steve alluded to, there is an area around the Great Lakes in Michigan, then down into a little bit of the lower portion of the upper Mississippi drainage that is above normal, as well as then some below normal in the Arkansas. So we do have, as the presenters today talked about, is we do have these pockets of risk, and that's always the case when it comes to weather. Everything normal is made up of the extremes. But as a broad area, if you added everything up, basically it's looking like for the Mississippi drainage specifically, that risk is pretty close to normal. And, the National Weather Service will continue to monitor this risk over the next couple of weeks before our next briefing coming up in 2 weeks. And we will kind of monitor these things like in Michigan and northern Indiana and northern Illinois, southern Wisconsin, and in other areas, including, as Kevin alluded to, out in the Rockies. But right now, as a whole, the Mississippi drainage itself, on a broad perspective, is pretty close to normal risk, but there are pockets of above and below normal. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Kelsey for questions. You can lead that.
Well, thank you very much, Jim, and we appreciate the presentations this afternoon from our service hydrologist at the River Forecast Centers. Betty, we'd be happy to entertain questions now.
I would like to remind everyone, in order to ask a question, please press star and the number 1 on your telephone keypad. We'll pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Your first question comes from the line of Donna Hogan.
Hi, Donna Hogan from Jefferson County in Wisconsin. For the National Weather Service, will you be offering a spring flood outlook for the Rock River Basin?
Hey, Donna, this is Steve Buan. The Rock River Basin does have some of that elevated flood risk, and Brian Hahn, the service hydrologist at the Milwaukee office, he'd be the one to contact at Brian Hahn, H-A-H-N, at the Milwaukee office for a thorough briefing on each of the points in the Rock River Basin in your area.
Okay, so you won't have the spring outlook, the flood outlook for March would not even include that?
Oh, it will. This is more of a broad scale, and Brian can drill you down right to the local individual points on each of the rivers.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Your next question comes from the line of Brown County.
Oh, never mind. Sorry.
Again, that's star and the number 1 for questions. There are no further questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. We'll continue to hold for a couple more minutes in case additional questions do come in. Just a reminder that this webinar has been recorded and we will be providing that recording via email. In addition to the invites to the upcoming next spring hydrologic outlook, which will be provided on Thursday, March the 6th at 2:30 in the afternoon. And invites for that upcoming webinar will be emailed early next week, as well as with the recording of today's presentation. Any additional questions from your end, Betty?
Yes. One moment. And your next question comes from the line of Jeremy.
Hello?
Hi, Jeremy. What's your question?
I was just wondering if there's a way to get added to this email list to get the this webinar that we just had.
Certainly. If you will send an email to me, and I'll get my email address out so you don't have to give your personal email address out. It's Kelsey, K-E-L-S-E-Y, .angle, A-N-G-L-E, at NOAA, NOAA.gov.
Thank you.
You bet. Any additional questions?
Again, that is star and the number 1 for questions. There are no further questions.
Okay. One more, just a quick reminder, and see if we'll have any additional questions come in. If not, we'll end today's webinar. The next call will be Thursday, March the 6th at 2:30 in the afternoon. And again, those invites will be sent out early next week, as well with a recording of today's webinar. And my email address is KELSEY.ANGLE@NOAA.gov. Any additional questions, Betty?
You have a question from the line of Dan Payne.
Hi, Dan. What's your question?
Yes, is the PowerPoint presentation going to be mailed to everybody that was on that email list?
Yes, we can provide a copy of the PowerPoint presentation as well. Yes, we can provide a copy of the PowerPoint presentation as well.
Oh, that'd be great. Thanks.
You're welcome. Any final questions?
Again, that's star 1 for questions. There are no further questions at this time.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, for today's participation. We'll go ahead and end the webinar, and we'll be in touch with everybody on March the 6th, which is a Thursday at 2:30 in the afternoon. Thank you very much.